yet again, we're living in a country that has basically sanctioned this kind of violence. And Shapiro has a defense, a new kind of twist on the guns don't kill people, people kill people thing, where he speaks about gun violence and he tries to make some sort of connection with embezzlement and I don't think he fully understands the point that he ends up actually making.
Again, a lot of folks have been claiming that this has to do with the prevalence of guns in the United States, but it's hard to make that link considering what's happening in California. And here is the rule. If there is a link if there is a mass shooting that cannot be explained by white supremacy or right-wing rhetoric, it immediately turns into a gun control narrative. We don't bother to look into the motive. We don't bother to look into any other factor. We don't look into mental illness. That's because the media have a stake in the gun control narrative.
Can you pause it for a sec?
Articles like the one.
Okay, so we don't look into mental illness. We've made this case before on the show. Then support Medicare for all. Make sure that everyone has access to a counselor if they need one, a mental health professional. His colleague, Candace Owens, just went on that bizarre rant that we covered last week where she said, don't go to therapy. If you're a young man, let it burn in your chest, your feelings and your emotions. That kind of open advocacy for not checking in with your emotions and not having robust mental health care is featured on his platform and also is exactly what leads to the disproportionate amount of mass shootings being from right-wing extremists, violent young men in particular, who are the target demographic for Daily Wire's programming. So, like, don't give me lip service about mental health when you aren't willing to do anything on the government level to actually deal with it. They just want to throw that out there as a way to distract. But
also, like, if like a Nazi shot up, say, like a mosque with assault rifles or that was modified to be automatic or something like that, I think that gun should be illegal and modification should be illegal.
Yeah.
Just because it was somebody who has similar ideology to, say, some of Ben Shapiro's more extreme audience members doesn't mean I forget about gun control.
Exactly.
If oftentimes my name was found or my Twitter handle was found at the top of mass shooters, most like the counts list post mass shooting, I would also be arguing that there is no context under which someone outside of the shooter is responsible for the shooting as well. And I think that's what we see from right wingers. They want to set the stage either knowingly or unknowingly for these sorts of things to happen and then argue that there is no such thing as context. There's no such thing as influence. There's no such thing as like a as a but for, like, this stuff was always happening, and that's why they have to like either abstract it to the point of being worthless or make you forget that other countries don't deal with this, that other countries have solved this problem.
Right wingers do this all the time. I mean, the right Republicans in general want to have as radical of a base as possible to use them for electoral gain, and then when something like January 6th happens, they rid themselves of all responsibility, even though that rhetoric is exactly what led to that kind of incident. And this is the same thing, just on a media level. I mean, well said, Brandon.
Yeah. But I mean, we have a society of people who like will self-describe as influencers, but will pretend like people cannot be influenced, which is one of the wildest things. It's like people go like, I'm an influencer. Oh, that scam ad I read, people know not to trust me. It's like, what does that even? That's the most ridiculous part of it.
I'm being paid to influence, but there's no way that anyone's getting influence. Yeah. All right, keep going.
It turns into a gun control narrative. We don't bother to look into the motive. We don't bother to look into any other factor. We don't look into mental illness. That's because the media have a stake in the gun control narrative, which is why you have articles like the one from Eugene Robinson.
Okay, pause it. I'm sorry. Like, just to emphasize Brandon's point, you have a stake in the gun control narrative. Actually, you more than anybody have a stake in the gun control narrative, because when we see right wingers and who their media sources are, I can't even remember the last mass shooting where it was like a Daily Wire consumer, but that has been the case. But okay, keep going.
We don't bother to look into the motive. We don't bother to look into any other factor. We don't look into mental illness. That's because the media have a stake in the gun control narrative, which is why you have articles like the one from Eugene Robinson over at the Washington Post in response to shootings in California, one of the more gun-controlled states in America. Eugene Robinson says the only way to stop
Sorry, it's still in the pause it. it's still in America, you fucking bozo.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, you can cross state lines incredibly easily, and that's why you need federal federal regulation.
this idea that we're being scientific by this is perfectly scientific because this is one state and this is a different state. This is both in the Second Amendment America, and if you made any sort of comparison with any other country, you would quickly realize like, oh yeah, they just don't deal with that like we do.
People act like germs can't cross state borders in this country, which doesn't even make any sense. Like,
Right.
Yeah. Right.
people have border fetishes.
Sorry, I just wanted to say really quick from the Montreal Gazette from May 2018, in quotes, "This evil piece of human crap happened to be somebody who had seen some of my tweets," Ben Shapiro said of Quebec mosque shooter Alexandre Bissonnette. So it's just like, this is, yeah,
There we go.
There's no stake, right? He has no stake in this gun control narrative either, I guess.
Search the Vic Berger mashup of Bissonnette being interviewed. He felt he needed to do something about the radical Muslim threat that Ben Shapiro was agitating about. And he did something. He killed people.
Which is why you have articles like the one from Eugene Robinson over at the Washington Post in response to shootings in California, one of the more gun-controlled states in America. Eugene Robinson says the only way to stop senseless mass shootings, you know the answer. The answer, of course, is the gun, the gun, the gun, the gun. The common factor always is the gun. There's one way the mass shooting Saturday in Monterey Park, California could have been prevented. One way that all mass shootings and individual shootings and gun suicides can be prevented: keep deadly firearms out of the hands of those who would use them to kill. Okay, well, the problem is you don't know who would use them to kill all the time. We all agree. People who are irresponsible with guns, if there were a way to weed them out, no one would want those people to own guns. If there were a way to weed out people who are mentally ill, it would be great to weed out people who are violently mentally ill from owning a gun. However, saying the gun is the major factor in violence is sort of like saying that money is the major factor in embezzlement. Yes, it is a vital tool for achieving the crime, but also happens to be used for a lot of other things that are legal and necessary.
Okay.
But the left-wing view, always and forever, is that if there is an evil person who does something terrible with a gun, all the people who are law-abiding have to have their guns removed from them, which is exactly what Eugene Robinson
is advocating for. Yeah, I guess he accidentally stumbled upon something there, right? If you want to get rid of all embezzlement, he wants to move to a moneyless United States. It's quite based.
We're gonna barter and trade from this point forward.
I guess so.
I think it's also right.
Oh, you go, Brandon.
I was going to say their understanding of mental illness is so obviously shallow and cartoonish. Both when, Candace Owens says that you shouldn't go to therapy because all they'll do is tell you like that your every feeling is valid. And when he says that like mental illness, if only there was some way, and he makes it seem like mental illness is just something that exists like naturally. And it does, obviously, as a result of chemical imbalances in people that from birth, and it's totally easy to, map and keep track of. But as we know, like mental illness can be a result of environment. A lot of them, a lot of the overarching factors that sort of make patterns of mass shooting have to do with like misogyny, domestic violence, things that we don't classify
Capitalism.
as mental illness, generally speaking, or like being contributing factors to mental illness or signs of mental illness. But certainly I think if we had a more holistic understanding of mental illness and, detethered from capitalism and misogyny and racism, we would be able to find a lot more people who are disqualified from using weapons, because we would be able to, like some states do, disqualify people with domestic violence charges from owning weapons. So, I mean, cops then would not have a lot of guns, obviously, but, it might also prevent some of these mass shootings. But the reality is they just don't want to do anything about it. They just want to make every problem individualized.
And honestly, if he wants to prevent embezzlement, you want to more tightly regulate trades and transactions. I mean, I'm fine with that. The currency that he's referring to, I guess fiat currency, is regulated. Its value is regulated highly by the United States government. Transactions should be regulated more, but the reality is that that's exactly what is being advocated for with weapons of war and with guns. You want to regulate? We should be regulating finance. We should be regulating guns.
Yeah, I mean, this moron and this analogy, which I've been puzzling over to try to make sense of since we stopped playing the clip. It doesn't. The money is not to embezzlement what guns are to mass shootings. Embezzlement is trying to get money. Mass shootings isn't somebody being like, oh, I hope I walk out of here with a bunch of guns, right? The actual analogy is poor accounting practices are to embezzlement what our gun laws are to mass shootings. And like, we shouldn't be allowing these sorts of guns to be produced for civilian population. It's insane. Like, I am somebody who I'm fine if you want to grant some sort of old timey like right to a rifle or certain types of guns for self defense. I think that you should be licensed with the Game and Fish Department for that. But like the idea that like money, like folks. Douglas Hofstadter and Emmanuel Sander, Surfaces and Essences, Analogy as the fuel and fire of thinking. That's where you want to go to understand about analogies. This was a complete like
no, the SATs
bullshit.
would not
Like,
would not be in favor of that analogy. They would scrap that from the test.
It's just it's just incorrect. Like, if anything, knives are like fiat currency and guns are like crypto. Ultimately, guns have a very, very narrow use case that people pretend is actually quite wide. And when you actually investigate what guns are being used for, not just like sitting in people's accounts, crimes, letting people pretend like they are savvier with modern technology, self-defense than they actually are until it comes to bite them in the butt, like a la losing all your money in a crypto exchange or getting shot by your dog while you're driving from a hunting trip or something, and it just shows the kind of grip that deregulation and libertarian thinking have on our society. Even people who do simply, Ben Shapiro obviously benefits from people thinking like this, but people who just don't benefit from guns being in our society, they don't benefit from crypto being in our society, will find themselves caping for this stuff under like the guise of like freedom and liberty and all these other things. Like, I just want to live my life. And it's just, these things are preventing you from living your life, as freely as possible, not keeping you freer from some sort of like imaginary tyranny of the government, because we're already under the tyranny of the government.
It's getting like to the point of like, I don't even know, just so monotonous, because these shootings happen so often and their comebacks are always the exact same. I guess credit to Ben Shapiro for the new embezzlement is to money. So that's throwing a wrench into it. But yeah, it's just,
they just need to confuse you until the next mass shooting happens. That's all it is. Like, they just need to confuse you until you forget about the next mass shooting. They need to, the Uvalde police just need to wait outside that door. That door, this is an analogy, that door being public awareness until people forget. So, and that's just the reality.
That's why they say mental health and move on. That's the same. It's the same thing.
Also, this particular shooting also completely destroys their whole good guy with the gun will take down bad guy with the gun scenario, because the guy who disarmed the shooter wasn't armed with anything. He physically forced the gun out of the guy's hand.
Yeah, that was a pretty amazing video.